So this put pressure on FDA, and they finally held a hearing in 2004. They suppressed their own experts' report that found the same thing that the British did, wasted taxpayer money and months and months and months and more deaths to get all the data reclassified by Columbia, who came up with the same conclusion. Many of you probably know that Elliot Spitzer sued GlaxoSmithKline in this time period for fraud for the way in which they handled the pediatric data. GlaxoSmithKline did settle that suit. The FDA finally held a hearing in 2004. I think in particular it was the pediatricians on that advisory board who were very moved by the data and by the testimony, and we finally got the first warning. A black box became official in 2005 that antidepressants, especially at the beginning of therapy or whenever the dose changes, up or down, so you heard Vera talk about withdrawal, very, very important. Please notice in Dr. Lofgren's overview that he says that with regard to children, the black box warning advises prescribers that they have to balance the risk with, quote, clinical need. He's being very disingenuous there to say clinical need because he can't say benefit, because there isn't proven benefit. And this is what the FDA keeps doing, is ignoring the efficacy side of the data. Here's the FDA list of side effects, akathisia among them, but I want to highlight also mania and hypomania. FDA has emphasized hypomania and mania. They devote an entire paragraph in the detailed warning, look at it, to mania and hypomania. This is just another way of blaming the patients. For years, they told us it was depression. Now they can't do that. So now they're saying it's triggering mania and hypomania. That's not true. If you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, you're not supposed to diagnose people as manic if they only look like that for the first time in antidepressants. It's a substance-induced mood disorder. If you look at the British list, mania and hypomania don't even appear. If you look at the Canadian list, it really emphasizes agitation, akathisia, and it also explicitly acknowledges aggression and violence, which FDA has so far failed to do. By 2006, this past spring, GlaxoSmithKline acknowledged for the first time that in their studies of adults with major depressive disorder, there was a 6.7-fold statistically significant increase in the risk of suicidal behavior. This was huge. This was another landmark, did not get adequate attention because of the way in which it was carefully presented to the media. Here's the analysis that we're all looking at and that Vera talked to you about in a little more detail. FDA is emphasizing the statistical significance of the under 25, but look at 45 to 54, 45 to 64, two-fold-ish increase, not quite statistically significant, and they want to just ignore that. Inappropriate statistically, as Vera has said. It's been much written about the very, very high bar that FDA is holding us to in order to acknowledge safety. It's been true of all of the other drugs that there have been scandals about in recent years as well. It's very important to keep in mind that this is still poor data. This is still data based on studies for depression, OCD, anxiety disorders. None of it's data from studies prospectively designed to look at treatment-emergent suicidality. Again, FDA repeatedly leaves efficacy out of the equation. One of the possibilities here, I personally don't think that this is all the data you saw. Vera showed you that. But one of the possibilities here is that because the drugs don't work in children, it essentially unmasks the induction of suicide by the drugs. So if once you get into middle-aged adults, you have some beneficial effect that makes some people less suicidal, in aggregate population data, it's going to cover that up. But if you acknowledge that it doesn't work in kids, it's going to reveal the induction of suicide. Again, FDA hasn't done anything about that, leaving efficacy out of the question and still not asking the companies to do the studies that are needed to really look at this. Here's the Paxil data in particular. Clearly a statistically significant, almost threefold increase in suicidality. They themselves have acknowledged that that's 6.7 if you just look at adults with major depressive disorder. FDA's handling of this side effect has been shameful. I talk in Prozac Backlash about a 10, 20, 30-year pattern, which we've seen over and over again with psychiatric drugs, where very early on, there are reports of some of what will prove to be the most serious side effects. In the first decade, the companies will so aggressively defend the drugs that we just don't get anywhere. And by the middle of the second decade, you start to see warnings, which is exactly what's happening. And guess what? Most of the drugs have gone off patent. The companies are no longer fiercely defending them. In fact, there's evidence that the companies actually cooperate and start to help discredit the earlier class of drugs that are now going off patent and are no longer profitable. Why? Because they have a new class in the pipeline that they're going to bring out as allegedly safer, largely because we don't know the risks. I can assure you that the next class of antidepressants that comes out will be marketed as causing less suicidality, which probably won't be true. How many decades are we going to have to wait for the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry to adequately research this and adequately warn about this side effect? The industry for years has been denying our case reports as anecdotes. Guess what? The anecdotes in 1991 were right. The junk science was wrong. The industry response has been to blame patients' psychiatric conditions. First, depression. They can't do that anymore, so now it's mania, hypomania. They scare the media away from dealing with the truth about this by saying that if you tell patients, if you warn patients, you'll scare them away from treatment. And again, I'm here to say that's not true. That's a dreadful authoritarian approach to medicine that's completely outdated. The most dangerous scenario is when doctors and patients don't know about this. Patients get the side effect, think they're a hopeless case, and are at very serious risk. I've warned people since the mid-1990s. Nobody who legitimately needed treatment has been scared away from it. All of them have been grateful to be told about a potentially fatal side effect. And I would ask you, if you were going to go on an antidepressant, or you were going to put one of your children on an antidepressant, or your spouse was going to go on an antidepressant, or one of your parents was going to go on an antidepressant, would you have been wanted to be warned about this for the last 15 years? Or would you have preferred an authoritarian approach like the Witczaks were subjected to, where you were told nothing, and this dreadful thing could strike you like a lightning bolt in your family? Thank you very much.